A very warm welcome, everyone, to the next episode of our Maritime Education podcast. I'm Barry Sadler, and today I'm going to talk to you about some of the SOLAS 2024 amendments that are coming into force. Before I do so, of course, it is the 2nd of January, so Happy New Year, everyone. Let's hope that 2025 brings us all health, prosperity, and happiness. And for those of you that are studying towards MCA exams and qualifications, let's hope that 2025 brings you the results that you need and want. So in this podcast, I'm going to go through some of the changes that have come into force on the 1st of January, in particular with SOLAS. I'm going to talk about the FOUL Convention very, very briefly as well, but mainly those changes that are coming into effect on the 1st of January relating to SOLAS. Let's not forget that SOLAS is 50 years old this year. The first iteration of SOLAS came out in 1974. Here we are in 2024, 50 years later, and we, I feel, have turned a corner. We've turned the corner with regards to the digitalisation of our systems. Now, I did my GMDSS certificate back in 1997, and we were told in 1997 that digitalisation was just around the corner, that we were about to enter an era where digital signals could be used to activate alarms both ashore and on ships to alert other vessels to the fact that we may be in need of some form of assistance. The ability to transmit data is something that in 1997 seemed quite far-fetched. Most of us had internet in 1997. That internet was provided via very, very slow telephone lines along exactly the same line as the telephone itself. It shared the same cable, it shared the same frequency, and therefore the data used to flow into your computer very, very slowly. So most of us were used to the ability to be able to send and receive data, albeit very, very slowly, over a telephone line. We recognised that this data was digital and that the ability to send the data over a telephone line was a great step forward. But then along came GMDSS, and when I did my course back in 97, we were told that now we have the ability to transmit this data wirelessly. We could transmit it wirelessly over VHF, over MF, over HF, and perhaps more significantly, and we're realizing that now, the ability to transmit data over satellite systems. Fast forward 50 years to 2024, we take it for granted now that we can exchange huge amounts of data. We can exchange huge amounts of data wirelessly using Wi-Fi systems, but on a worldwide basis, we now have the ability to exchange huge amounts of data over satellite systems. And this has allowed pretty much every single network to do with shipping to evolve. It's allowed things like bills of lading to evolve, container planning to evolve, and the ability to share the data that's created ashore makes work on board the ship much easier. Artificial intelligence is also being brought into play. And before I talk about these amendments to SOLAS, let's think a little bit about artificial intelligence. Last year, I attended a seminar up at Trinity House in which we discussed artificial intelligence and how it was making its way positively into the marine industry. The three basic elements that you need for an AI system are data, algorithms, and the ability to compute those algorithms. Now, the ability to compute algorithms comes from the equipment that we have on board the ship. And considering that we now have handheld devices that are able to operate AI systems, indicates that it's very, very easy for us to put such systems on board the ship. Algorithms are constantly being written by various companies with interests in marine automation and marine AI, and these algorithms are used to process the information that we need and to use the most important factor that goes into AI, and that's data. But when you think about it, the shipping industry has huge amounts of data. Logbooks go back hundreds and hundreds of years, perhaps even thousands of years when it comes to ships. We can look back at 1,000-year-old manuscripts from ships' captains detailing their voyages. The data is there. Data on what happens on board ships, data on how the ships operate, where they go, how fast they get there, how much fuel they used to get there, how much cargo they carried, where that cargo was put. These huge amounts of data are already available to the seafarers. Ports as well hold huge amounts of data. In Southampton, we use a system called PAVIS, the Port and Vessel Information System. And this is constantly absorbing data. Data fed in by ships' agents, data fed in by VTS operators, data fed in by pilots. And this enables the system to generate large amounts of records of when ships arrived, when they berthed, how long it took them to berth, where they were at certain points, the progress of that voyage, as well as a general overview of shipping to and from the port itself. So raw data used to train AI systems is very, very much available now, and in huge amounts when it comes to maritime systems and data. So AI is making its way into our everyday shipping computing and our everyday shipping tools that we use to be able to make our lives at sea easier. So let's move away from AI and let's talk more about digitalisation and the ability to transmit and receive huge amounts of data. And this forms the part of the SOLAS modernisation that's happening this year. So let's talk about these SOLAS changes, because these SOLAS changes do mean that huge amounts of data can be exchanged, and that means that systems that are powered by AI can be used much more effectively. SOLAS amendments that I'm about to talk about do enter into force and become effective from yesterday, the 1st of January 2024. And the first one I want to talk about is the one where we really do talk about the exchange of data, and that is the modernisation of the GMDSS system, the Global Maritime Distress and Safety System. Now, this has had a comprehensive review over the past 2 or 3 years. And the reason it's had this comprehensive review is that we finally have a recognised secondary satellite system provider. When Iridium was announced as being adopted by the IMO as being capable of providing the same GMDSS coverage that the original operator Inmarsat gave us, it gave us the ability to incorporate redundancy into our systems on board the ship. One of the principles of GMDSS is that any piece of equipment that we have on board for making a distress call must be backed up by a secondary piece of equipment. This means that up until a couple of years ago, when Iridium was recognised by the IMO as being a satellite provider within the GMDSS system, we only had a single satellite provider, Inmarsat, and therefore a single satellite system available on board the ship. If the Inmarsat system went down, then mariners would not have a secondary means of alerting authorities to distress if the satellite system was the only system provided on board the ship. Now, don't get me wrong, we're not in the at the stage of ditching things like VHFs yet, but what we have done is we have doubled the redundancy of the ability to transmit data on a global basis. And so with the introduction of Iridium, we now have 2 satellite systems that are capable of distributing data to ships worldwide. Now, on the commercial side of things, obviously there are more than 2 satellite providers. Probably the most common dish that I see on ships as a pilot is a Starlink dish. And the captains are very, very happy with their Starlink. It gives the crew the ability to get onto the internet at a very, very reasonable price to the ship owner. Seafarers deserve data. Yep, a seafarer serving at sea, particularly this time of year, will be in a much better position, both mentally and physically, if they are able to communicate effectively with loved ones during the holiday period. The ability to provide data to the crew through systems such as Starlink not just gives everybody better quality of life at sea, but I think makes ships safer. Because at the end of the day, when seafarers are content on board, they have the ability to focus on tasks a lot better, rather than be distracted wondering what's happening at home with loved ones because they've been unable to contact them for weeks on end because the ship has been in ports where they've been unable to get ashore, etc., etc. So the ability to provide cost-effective communications for seafarers on board ship, that's amazing. Seafarers deserve data, and I think that's something that we should push forward. Away from that side of things, we have these 2 satellite providers now able to give us data under the distress system. So we have the ability not just to transmit a digital data distress over the satellite system, but we have the ability to use data voice systems in order to initiate distresses, and we now have the ability to receive data maritime safety information. Now, on Inmarsat, I think we're all used to the Inmarsat system. We've had it for a long time. SATC EGC, Enhanced Group Calling System under Inmarsat. That brings us MSI. Under Iridium, it's called SafetyCast, and it's the same system. It uses data to transmit maritime safety information, or navigational warnings, if you like. So the first big amendment to SOLAS is the modernisation of the GMDSS system, recognising that we now have 2 independent means of transmitting data via satellite. So outdated systems such as Navtex can start to now be legally dropped. Because at the end of the day, if you've got 2 satellite systems capable of receiving maritime safety information over data, there's your redundancy. No need to have this rather out-of-date analog system sitting there in the background. So the GMDSS review fundamentally acknowledges the provision of satellite providers rather than focusing on the single Inmarsat solution that was brought into effect in 1997 when I did my GMDSS course. Because these are fundamental changes to the GMDSS system, they're incorporated into SOLAS Chapter 2, SOLAS Chapter 3, SOLAS Chapter 4, SOLAS Chapter 5. There's a lot of chapters that are affected by the introduction of the modern GMDSS systems. When you read through the IMO resolution talking about it, there's nothing hugely different to that we are already used to. We can see that provision of equipment in sea areas A1 and A2, A3 and A4 are fundamentally the same. But if you've got Iridium on board, Iridium does have polar orbiting satellites, so Iridium effectively drops the A4 area. If we don't have Iridium, that's different. We must still respect the A4 area requirements. A4, of course, being the poles, and the reason that we have an A4 area is because the old Inmarsat system, I say old, it's existing, it's still working, it's being modernised, but let's call it the original Inmarsat system, didn't do well at the poles, whereas Iridium does because its satellites are polar orbiting. Inmarsat satellites are what we call geostationary. There's only a few of them, and they are stationary over a geographical point. Now, they cover north and south to 60 degrees, 60 degrees north to 60 degrees south, which, of course, are the main areas for shipping, the main populated areas. And so they do cover 90% of what goes on the Earth. But that other 10% that's left, those latitudes above 60 degrees, are not covered by Inmarsat, or if they are covered by Inmarsat, then they become unreliable, and that's why we've got an A4 area. Iridium polar orbiting satellites are not affected by the latitude of the ship, and therefore Iridium can now be used in the poles. So this gives us our, if you like, secondary means of transmitting distress that is the fundamental principle of any GMDSS system. You must be able to contact a coast radio station by two means, regardless of where you are on the Earth's surface. You must be able to receive MSI through two means, regardless of where you are on the Earth's surface. And the introduction of a second, shouldn't call it secondary because it's not secondary, it's equal to Inmarsat. The introduction of a second satellite system provides us with that ability. As you look down through the GMDSS requirements, as I say, not a lot has changed other than the fact that we can now rely on satellite provision a lot more than we could. We've all still got to have a VHF radio within every single area. Yep, a ship must always be provided with a VHF radio. As we go to A2, we bring in MF. As we go to A3, we bring in HF or satellite. But two satellite providers means that we can now start to drop some of this equipment legally and be able to initiate distress through two independent means on a global basis. Some other changes that have come in, the records of equipment that are connected with the cargo ship safety certificate, cargo ship safety equipment, and passenger ship safety certificate have also, of course, had to be changed. And, excuse me, the reason for this is because those records of equipment note the GMDSS requirements, and therefore we've got to change it. Some other amendments to SOLAS that are coming in are amendments to the International Code Safety for ships using gases or other low flashpoint fuels, which basically means that liquefied gas fuel tanks on ships, so ships that are powered by gas, must have more robust firefighting systems on board the ship and must be able to withhold certain pressures within the tank and within the distribution system for that gas around the ship, in recognition of the use of low flashpoint fuels and gases for propulsion on board the ship. And that's a very, very natural progression, if you like, of the SOLAS Convention to take care of that. Life-saving appliances has changed to the LSA code, which recognises that the ability for lifeboats to be launched when the ship is doing 5 knots only applies to gravity lifeboats and doesn't apply to freefall lifeboats. Bit of a strange one. That, I think, it crept in under the radar, but that has been verified with the 2024 amendments. Towing and mooring. Amendments to SOLAS Regulation 2 for towing and mooring equipment basically require appropriate and safe-to-use designs of mooring equipments to be introduced on board ships. The inspection regime must be properly documented within the safety management system, and guidelines were adopted covering the design of mooring arrangements and the selection of appropriate mooring equipment and fittings for the safe mooring of the vessel. Maintenance and inspection of this equipment is obviously vitally important, and although the requirements for mooring and towing have always been there, they have been refined to ensure that the design of the ship is taken into account in a more refined way when selecting your mooring equipment. Failures of mooring equipment have been prolific, particularly since COVID, where perhaps maintenance of these systems wasn't undertaken as regularly as it should be, and this also is covered by the new requirements under SOLAS. There are new requirements regarding watertight integrity requirements under SOLAS that have come in as well. These requirements formalise the watertight subdivision arrangements on board a ship that are used to determine the damage stability status of a ship by not allowing water to flow in between compartments above the freeboard deck. In other words, it recognises things like splash doors and splash ledges that are installed on ships above the freeboard deck, which contribute towards the watertight integrity of the individual subdivisions of the ship to a certain extent. It reiterates the fact that penetrations through watertight bulkheads must meet very exacting standards so that in the case of flooding, water is unable to transverse through those bulkheads. But fundamentally what it does is it formalises the provision of watertight doors and other means of passing from one watertight compartment to another, be it a means that a person has to use or be it a means that is used by a pipeline or something like that. So watertight subdivision is covered by the amendments as well. One of the more interesting amendments is an amendment that requires water level detectors on cargo ships other than bulk carriers and tankers. Now, for some time, we have had in place a requirement that says that bulk carriers that were built after 2012 must have on board these water level indicators within their holds. Whereas from the 1st of January, that requirement extends to new build vessels from the 1st of January 2024 on any cargo ship. Fundamentally, any cargo ship must now have 2 levels of alarms that operate in the cargo holds. The first level is at a height of 0.3 metres above the tank top, and then the other at a height not less than 15% of the depth of the cargo hold, but not more than 2 metres above the tank top deck. It must be fitted at the after end of the cargo holds and must have an alarm and an overriding device that sounds in a place where it can be detected. Normally this place is, of course, on the bridge. So this is something that bulk carriers were required to implement. That's bulk carriers over 150 metres, but now is a requirement that's extended to multiple hold cargo ships other than bulk carriers. Obviously, smaller coasters have a single hold, and therefore this wouldn't apply. But that's another very, very interesting amendment that has come in. There are some other more minor amendments that have come into force. Conditions of assignment of freeboard is affected, of course, by the watertight subdivisional requirements. The code for fire safety systems relating to fault isolation has been amended. So there are also amendments to the Maritime Dangerous Goods Code, the IMDG code, which is in line with updates to the UN recommendations on the transport of dangerous goods. These have actually been in a circulation from the 1st of January 2023 on a voluntary basis. Before I leave this little update podcast, I just want to talk quickly about the FOUL Convention, a facilitation of marine traffic convention. It's a convention that's often forgot about, but it's a convention that allows ships to interact with the countries that they visit in a more efficient and, if you like, regulated way. Again, the transmission of data has made the IMO consider how data is received by individual ports. And what the IMO have identified is that some ports require multiple reports to be made to a port under the requirements of the not just of the FOUL Convention, but of the individual state itself. And when this information is transmitted electronically, it's sometimes required to be transmitted to multiple sources or multiple windows, if you like. What the revised FOUL Convention says, again, comes into effect from the 1st of January, is that lessons learnt during the COVID 2019 pandemic, the COVID-19 pandemic, which happened, of course, in 2020, not 2019. Lessons learnt from that mean that we've now got a mandatory single window. So, in other words, ports must adjust their data systems so that the master of a ship can transmit all the data required by that port through the FOUL Convention to a single window, and that it can be distributed from that single window. That's not a big ask. Yep, it's just basically saying, look, one data transmission would be received by a port, and anybody with an interest in that data transmission must be able to access that data in order to get the information that they need on a mandatory basis. The electronic exchange of information required on the arrival, stay and departures of ships is going to always be there and regulated by the individual flag state that the ship is visiting. But the FOUL Convention makes it very, very clear that masters' time should not be wasted sending multiple bursts of data to multiple agencies in order to meet these FOUL requirements. And again, this recognises the importance of data coming from ships and the importance of how efficient the systems can be when a lot of that data can be generated automatically and sent forward to the next port automatically to that mandatory single window without the master having to sit there for hours on end making these initial preliminary reports to the ports in which they visit. Again, another very, very good change coming into effect from the 1st of January this year. I will come back to you with some changes that are going to be coming in on May of this year, and we've mentioned that in previous podcasts, but we'll mention that again. But for now, they're the changes to SOLAS that are coming in January 2024. And again, let's recognise the fact that a lot of this is driven by the ongoing and advanced digitalisation of the shipping industry. That digitalisation is making our systems more efficient. It's providing us with the redundancy required to ensure that at all times the safety of life at sea and the ability to indicate distress has a backup system available. So mariners are never reliant on a single source of data transmission. Thank you very much for listening to this podcast. It's great to have you all on board, and we'll generate another one in the very near future. But in the meantime, once again, Happy New Year, everyone. Have a wonderful 2025, and I look forward to the next episode. Thank you very much.